the average TFSA and RSP and savings balances of Canadians by age. So I put, no, I didn't put this together, but I saw this chart and I stole it from somewhere on Twitter. And this is a breakdown of Canadians by age group and their average amount of balance that's in each type of account. So an RSP or registered retirement savings plan, in case you guys are like people watching, our audience members who are not Canadian, that's the equivalent of an IRA in the United States, roughly, right? And the TFSA is the equivalent of a Roth IRA. So it's after tax money that is not taxed on the gains. Bank account is pretty self-explanatory. It's just like regular savings accounts. And then the last column is the sum of the total savings when you add those together. So you can see that the Canadians under 35 are actually doing a little bit better than the Canadians aged 35 to 44, which is somewhat surprising, but maybe it's because, like once you're 35 to 44, you got kids and like, you got more expenses and stuff like that. So you might make more, but then you also have a lot more spending than people under 35, right? But the average total savings of Canadians under 35 is about 29,000 Canadian dollars, and that goes down to 27,000 Canadian dollars when you're 35 to 44. And then when you make the jump to 45 to 54, that's kind of when it starts to go back up a lot again. And the average is around 55,000. And then when you get to the older crowd, 55 to 64, it really starts to jump up, right? The average is 126K. And then once you get to 65 and older, they have like a lot more money than everyone else at 259K on average, right? So this is kind of like the breakdown of the charts, and then you guys can like look at in each individual field for each individual accounts and age group. I'm not going to go through that line by line, but here is the chart. So my question or today's topic of discussion is, what do you guys think of this chart? Do you think, it's like, do you think Canadians are doing well or doing badly based on their average sum of savings that they have? And yeah, like if we're doing well, why do you think we're doing well? If we're doing badly, why do you think we're doing badly? That's kind of the topic of discussion that I wanted to kind of go down. So I don't know who wants to take this first.
Doing absolutely horribly. Like that's so okay, this is a bit mean. Okay, excuse the French. No, I'm not gonna swear, it's fine. But I think this fundamentally goes behind the fact that our school systems perhaps don't really have financial education systems or like classes in place. So people are more susceptible to like being irresponsible with money. And honestly, I think this is a general result of this. I mean, you can argue that it's inflationary times, things are really expensive. But if you precautionarily did the proper steps and like, you know, found ways to keep money and understand that like, oh, you need to, buy assets so you can grow and grow your money a lot more and keep your liabilities nice and like small, then I don't think that you would have like 27K between the ages of 35 to 44. If I were to be frank with you, I think when you're 35 years old, I think you probably should have at least like $100,000 like worth of net worth, and I think 27K is a bit low, and that just goes from the fact that not everyone's like completely financially like literate, and that's something they need to study up on. And on the caveat, some people are born in specific circumstances or whatnot, but I think general knowledge and like investing into asset classes and lowering liabilities is like a huge part of like building your total net worth. And if you just understand these principles, I think you can have more than 27K in your overall bank account, including, you know, TFSA and RSP. I think it's a bit questionable that Canadians are, at this current state. And yeah, Tristan, you can go ahead.
You know what I'm gonna say? I'm gonna say that's terrifying, given that this is average. This is average. That means that anyone with a lot of money in their TFSA, RSP, or whatever is going to be throwing the scale and giving money to people who have less money in their, what's it called? So, for example, if you are under the age of 35 and you say have $1 million, and there is 10 people who have $0, well, the average is 100K, my guy. Right? So, based on that, I think that factor, because it's average, not median, and I believe the median is probably worse. I would be I feel like these are a very low amount of money to have in your accounts, in just in like for planning for future retirement, as well as just being able to bear unexpected expenses, right? Because again, there will be unexpected expenses that come up that you can't foresee. So having access to money in a TFSA or a bank account to cover some of these expenses. So, for example, a car breakdown, a car repair, whatever. Right. So I think that this is I think it's very concerning. I don't think that this is a ton of money, but again, I also think that these numbers are high, which is another scary factor. I think that these numbers are actually higher than they would be for most people. So, and again, I think that if we took net worth, for example, I think that like age 65, age 55 to 65, I think that those amounts would be a lot higher from like house ownership, etc., especially in Canada, where you bought a house for $20,000 in 1975, and now it's worth many millions. So I'm not as concerned for the older folks, but I think the big concern is the two middle eras, the under 35. Yeah, honestly, the first three are the big concerns, because those are the ones that a 45-year-old may not have a house, so they may not have an asset like that. But the 35 and the younger than 35, a lot of them don't have any assets whatsoever. So the what you see on this chart is the majority of their net worth, right? Or the majority of their savings or their assets. So I think that that's just very concerning. I don't think it speaks to a particularly good situation, particularly for the younger folks. That's was there a specific question also that I was supposed to answer?
No, I was getting to it, but that would be part two. But let me just maybe speak on what I think of this part. Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. I'm actually concerned about all the age groups, right? So like Tristan said, this is average, not median, right? So if you look at median, it'll probably be a lot worse. And yeah, sure, like the younger demographics have lower savings, which is not great. But the older people who have more savings, you might think that that's great. But I know a lot of older people that don't have 100K or 200K like sitting in their bank account or sitting in their investment account either, right? And for those people, it's a lot more concerning, because they don't have the ability to like learn new skills and go get a new job if they don't have money, right? So like even like 55 is still relatively young, maybe, so maybe you can still like get a new job by then. But if you're like in the 60s kind of range, 64, 65, like you're supposed to be retired by that point, right? And if you're forced to go get a new job because you don't have money anymore and you don't have enough saved for retirement, like you're just gonna have a bad time. There's like no way around it. So companies, especially like these startup tech companies, are probably not gonna hire like a 65-year-old unless you have some like special skill that no one else has, right? So a lot of these older folks, end up going to minimum wage jobs, like they go to Walmart, they go to Home Depot and places like that, right? And those jobs don't pay a lot. So Yeah, I just think that this is a huge issue. And to answer Tristan's question, is there a second part to this story? So you guys know that I'm gonna bring this up, right? And I know that this again is gonna sound super like biased and whatnot, but my question is, how much of this is Trudeau's fault, right? I always ask this question every single episode, and I know like you can hear the pushback already. It's like, oh, you just have an anti-liberal bias. You're just like a shill for Pierre. It's like, number one, okay, maybe it's true. I do have a anti-liberal bias, but I'm not a shill for Pierre. I'm not a shill for anybody. I'm not getting paid to like promote anything or promote political like propaganda. Like these are just my kind of honest stream of consciousness kind of thoughts, right? And the reason, and again, if Pierre was in charge or if a conservative government was in charge, I'd be picking on them too for these results, right? Like if you mess up this badly, then prepare to answer to the everyday Canadian, to voters, right, to constituents who are upset about the way that the economy is going. So I think, I'm picking on Trudeau because he's the prime minister right now, and he's been the prime minister for 10 years. And this is the state that our economy is in, right? And last week we showed a chart where the GDP per capita of Canada, right, ever since Trudeau got into power, if you look at the like GDP per capita compared to the United States, it was in lockstep before Trudeau came into power. And as soon as he came in power, Canada fell off and the United States kept on going, right? So my point was that of that episode, of that story, was that economic policy matters. And I think that this is just another instance of where you can see how much exactly does leadership in our government matters for economics, for economic policy, and how that affects everyday Canadians in general. So my question to you is, again, how much of this is Trudeau's fault? And do you think that, this is mismanagement on Trudeau's part or just on the government's part in general?
So I think that you do tend to get a little bit direct with Trudeau on the blame side, because like on this one, I don't know the exact stats for the past, but from what I recall from looking at stats in the past, this kind of breakdown where basically everyone has no money has been a kind of ongoing theme throughout at least my remembered looking into this sort of stuff. Again, I haven't been looking into this for that long, but I feel like I have recollections of seeing stats such as this and being like, that doesn't seem like a lot of money, you know, 5-10 years ago, right? And
Well,
so
Trudeau's been in charge for 10 years, man. He's been in there for the whole
he was, yeah, but if we go back 10 years ago, he just got in charge. It's not his fault, we aren't going to blame Pierre when he gets in for this on the day he gets in or the year he gets in, right? So I don't think that this is necessarily entirely his fault. I think that there's a couple things that I think are his fault. I think that not encouraging, or at least to my knowledge, not encouraging financial education in schools is something that I think Trudeau could have had some aspect of. I understand that that is provincial, but there could be efforts made to make that a priority for the provincial folks, right? So that, as Dom was kind of alluding to, people understand what they need to do to have a good future, right? So that people can prepare for the future by like planning, buying, investing assets and stocks, etc. So that's not this like scary unknown, right? And so from that perspective, I think that there's stuff that he could do. And then in addition, I think that one aspect that we're not seeing here is the inflation aspect, right? So that dollar amount can buy less stuff than that dollar amount if it was the same dollar amount 10 years ago, right? And Trudeau did have a large role in the additional inflation. Again, you can make the argument that some of it was unavoidable because of the pandemic, and that the pandemic was difficult to manage for basically every political leader. But again, I'm just saying his decisions in that instance directly contributed to the purchasing power of this money that is people have saved being less valuable. And honestly, if your money is becoming less valuable, you are inclined to spend it as soon as possible, right? And I think that is another indirect aspect of the inflation. Whereas if I know that it's going to cost more to buy canned goods next time I go shopping, I'll buy canned goods today, right? Or more canned goods, right? So, and then I'll have less money to buy assets, right? Or honestly, just having my accounts for this metric. So I think that he has some role. I think that, is it fair to really blame him for the majority of this situation? It gets difficult because it's a lot of what he's done has been very indirect. It's not directly contributing to this fact, but there's been a lot of things that have been indirectly contributing to this fact. Another one is like housing, for example, the cost of housing going up, right? He's contributed indirectly to the cost of housing going up. So that's another area where if I'm paying more for housing, I have less money in my savings accounts. So again, he's had a lot of indirect contributions to this situation. How many direct ones, and if it's really like his fault, I think it's difficult to judge, at least for me, because I don't think that. Sorry, I just want to say I just don't think that a different government would have necessarily prevented this exact scenario from happening. That's kind of where I'm getting at. So unless you're blaming all political parties for their failures to resolve this issue, I think that it's difficult to say that Trudeau did this more than others have in the past.
What I have to say to that is the same thing that I said last episode, which is leadership matters and economic policies matter. Again, this is like the example that I brought up last time was Microsoft stock, right? So if you look at the chart of Microsoft stock price under Bill Gates' leadership, and then transition on to Steve Ballmer, and then transition on to Satya Nadella, you can tell that Bill Gates brought the company from basically nothing to like a sky high valuation, right? And then he left. He gave the company to Steve Ballmer, and then under Steve Ballmer, the stock went nowhere for 10 years. And then Satya Nadella took over, and then the stock price pretty much almost immediately. It wasn't like exactly immediate, of course, right? But after Nadella took over, the stock price went up, and now it's the second most valuable company in the world, bested only by the aforementioned Nvidia, which was a recent thing that just happened like a week ago or a couple days ago, not even a week ago. So yeah, I just think that again, leadership matters, and I'm not trying to single out Trudeau as much as it sounds like I am. I'm singling out the current administration, right? The current incumbent people that are in charge that I think, again, there's an argument as to how direct their effect is. And I'm not trying to argue that Trudeau is the cause of every single financial woe that Canada has gone through, right? Obviously, a lot of that was not under his control, just like how everything, like the CEO of a company doesn't control everything that happens in his company, right? But again, leadership matters. And I think that the leadership on the economic front has been super, super subpar ever since Trudeau came into power. So yeah, Dom, you haven't spoken in a while. Let me pass it to you. What do you think? Do you blame Trudeau for this, or do you think that this is a complicated issue and, are you going to defend him?
Okay, so here's my thoughts on that overall. To give him like the benefit of the doubt, like, we're under like really unique circumstances in this specific decade, the beginning of the pandemic. And, you know, of course there's like probably no choice but to have to print money because no one is like able to work, right? So government has to give money to like citizens in order to like survive and stuff like this. And because of that, when everyone was able to start work again, or when everyone had the opportunity to be able to work again, because people were spending money and then interest rates were so low that things were getting a little out of hand. So federal governments needed to raise interest rates again, and that whole shenanigan area thing couldn't really be avoided. So that's why we're in like our situation that we are now. But on the flip side, I think maybe in terms of like the leadership aspect and stuff like that, um, maybe Trudeau's economic policies, I don't know what they are completely. I'm not knowledgeable in that, but I think from my point of view, it may not be like beneficial for Canada, like housing and etc. Like um, related but not related, like immigration policies, like that is not like a pro to Canada too as well. Could be, but maybe not right now. Like these small like micro decisions have like a certain effect on Canada, and therefore the GDP is like kind of affected by that. But at the same time, there's so many natural effects that are like pretty uncontrollable. So I can't say it's completely his fault, but you can argue that it's partially maybe his fault just because of the way everything is now. And then he is the leader after all. I guess I agree with Andy, and he could have done maybe some things differently. But I'll say like it probably isn't fully his fault because of all these natural occurrences, but maybe partially.